And now we are on to the very final speaker of the day, who is often described as the Willy Wonka of technology. He's Astro Teller. He's the head of Alphabet X, the Moonshots factory, which Google set up in 2010 to tackle some of the world's toughest problems and in the process, create the next Google. X has a reputation for being able to pursue the kinds of projects nobody else can. And 10 years in, some people are also asking how long it will be before any of those projects hits the big time. So we're very, very happy that Astro is here to talk about what he's learned over that past decade. So thank you, Astro. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I want to start by talking about one of your relatively newer projects, which is a project on computational agriculture. You recently gave it a name, Mineral. In a blog post, the project lead wrote about this mantra that you have at X, which is that 10x or 10 times is easier than 10%. In other words, it can be easier and better to radically transform something than trying to incrementally improve an existing system. So if we take that 10x semi-literally for a second, agriculture is an interesting area because if you look at crop yields over the past century or so across the world in different crops, we've seen increases of 4, 5, 6, even eightfold in yield. Now it seems like you're suggesting that we can see an increase similar to that again in agriculture. So I'd like to know what this project is about, how you're doing it, and why you think that there is room for that kind of growth.
Sure. Let's just start by taking a bit of a step back with respect to how food has been produced. So, if you go back far enough, people used to have to go look for food. And so it was one of the most important things that humanity ever did to start growing food. That was a really big change. It was at least a 10x change. If you look more recently over the last sort of 200 years, there have been 3 really transformative waves that have hit how food is produced. The first was mechanical. Instead of having a person with maybe a mule that you sort of walked around the field and the mule or the ox or whatever did what they did, we've started to make mechanical things that have gotten bigger and bigger until you have these sort of huge combines today. But the mechanical changes have easily 10x'd a lot of how food is both put into the ground and retrieved again. The second wave is chemical. So we would all starve to death, all of us, or almost all of us, if we couldn't fixate nitrogen. There's not enough arable land in the world. And so it wasn't just a 10x improvement, it was kind of a qualitative improvement. They literally make it so that the world could have 10 billion people instead of 1 billion people, to be able to fixate nitrogen, to take nitrogen out of the air and put it in something that would stay still so you could put it in the ground. This is sort of the Haber-Bosch process. And a lot of things have come afterwards, herbicides and pesticides, as well as fertilizers and things like that. And then, Monsanto and Syngenta, there was a whole big wave around biologics, and that has really transformed things. Our observation at its very highest level is we're ready for the next one, and it's going to be automation. Tools from artificial intelligence, new sensors, being able to get out in the field and start to manage plants on a per plant basis is going to be a really radical change in how plants are taken care of. And when you're looking at 10x, I'm not sure it's just about how much food is grown or how cheaply it's grown. Some will be more food. Some of it will be less expensively. Some of it will be in a more sustainable way. Right now, we're wearing out the earth. We have maybe 50, maybe if we're lucky, 60 harvests left on the planet before we're just done. And the planet's like, well, I'm out. So we need to do something. We have to lower the carbon footprint of making each calorie worth of food. So I think there's easily a factor of 10 in there across all of those dimensions. You'd only have to do a factor 2 on maybe 3 or 4 of those dimensions to get to your factor 10.
Mineral, I think, is interesting because from the outside, it seems like in some ways even more of an ambitious challenge than some of X's other projects, because you're trying to reform a very complex global system of food production with countless stakeholders. And get people to change practices that are deeply embedded, change economic incentives. And correct me if you think I'm wrong, but if I compare this with something like Loon, where you're just trying to put balloons in the air and beam internet from them, or even Waymo, where you're trying to solve a very hard technical problem of self-driving cars, but that is the problem you're trying to solve. This seems almost like insanely complex. Is that, and much more long term? Does that seem right?
That's not been our experience. I don't want to prejudge it, but I think Minerals on a bit of a glide path. Part of it is just the particular habits that they have on the team. Can we bring up slide number 1? The habits that they have on the team are very wired towards the kind of innovation that I believe in, which is to say, I'm not a believer in anything, or certainly not in any concrete or specific things. I'm a believer at a meta level in a way of going and finding out what will actually work, which involves very tight learning loops, which is hard to get teams in the mindset of. And in this particular case, they're exceptionally good at actually doing those tight learning loops. If you could go to slide number 2, this thing that you just saw literally has bicycle wheels on it. And 2 years later, they now have really great robots in the field. And they would have made horrible robots to put in the field. These are plant buggies. And these plant buggies would have not been the right thing to make. They're still not perfect, obviously, if they hadn't done 20 iterations of them first, really cheaply and inexpensively, because that's how you learn what you actually should be doing. So partly because of how the team's showing up, partly actually this is not a heavily regulated environment. Waymo, the safety issues are off the charts. And so for a decade, we have been exceptionally careful about what we do, but that slows up the rate at which we can learn because we have to be super, super careful. These plant buggies go slow enough and there are few enough people around that safety is just not as much of a concern for us. Our chances of hurting somebody are very low. In this particular case, it weighs a small amount as much as a car does. Verily, which also came from X, is the life science business for Alphabet. That also is a very regulated environment. So I feel like in some of these areas, it's been very complicated to get going, and each step is somewhat fraught. I'm very proud of these businesses. But in this particular case, actually the partners who we've been working with have said, oh, thank God you're here, and are excited to work with us. We've been out in fields in a number of continents with small farmers and big farmers, and we feel like we've had fantastic kind of relatively quick turnover in this space. So no, actually, I bet you this is one of the ones that goes fast.
Interesting. So what do you think it takes or will take for farmers all around the world to be using these plant buggies?
Well, I think I'm going to channel the team. I'm not sure I totally agree with them, but I think the team would tell you, look, we'll make these plant buggies faster and cheaper and smarter over time, but we're never going to make them maybe cheap enough and fast enough that they're just going to be everywhere on the planet. And we need to have a much more heterogeneous set of ways of getting data about the fields so that we can help farmers and breeders in all of the ways that we aspire to. So, I think on behalf of that team, I would say, I'm not promising you that the plant buggy is the only solution. I'm telling you, if you could go to slide 4 for a second. So this is pea and oats, I believe, which are typically planted together. And on the left, you have what you see when the plant buggy is just sort of rolling by. This is a side view, obviously. And on the right, you see our system labeling every single pod that it sees in real time, and then gathering data about that to help the growers in these fields understand what they're looking at and how to manage their fields better. And that's the kind of thing that you're not going to get from even a low-flying drone or something like that. And so this is really exciting. It's valuable to farmers today. But I think there's a lot of open questions about, for a really wide range of plants, in a wide range of environments, with a wide range of sort of economic realities for farmers across the planet, I think we're going to have a pretty varied set of abilities to help farmers before we're really everywhere.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about another of the projects that you've got, which you announced this year, Tidal, which is a response to declining fish stocks. And your goal there is to make fish farming more sustainable by giving fish farmers cameras and machine vision tools that allow them to understand the health of the fish that they're husbanding. Is this also something where you think it's possible to make an impact quickly?
Totally. In fact, what you just described, I would call more like the beachhead for that team. So if you sat and talked with Tidal, what they would say is, right now, humanity is extracting, sort of depending on how you count, $2 or $3 trillion a year from the oceans. But we're destroying the oceans in the process. Roughly a tenth of humanity depends primarily on the oceans in one way or another for their livelihood, their food, their existence. We cannot kill off the oceans. The whole world's going to hell in a handbasket if we do. We need to be able to extract more value, a lot more value probably, from the oceans per year, while simultaneously doing it much more sustainable. Our belief is that's only going to happen if we take automation to the oceans. Now, that aquaculture is a great place to start with that, but I don't think that aquaculture is the end of that story. I think aquaculture is a really smart place to get into doing that, but I'm sure that there's going to be a lot more to the story than just aquaculture. But in the aquaculture space, the low-hanging fruit, pun intended, I realize we've just moved to the oceans, is incredible. People don't know what's going on with their fish. And so they have a very hard time being efficient about taking care of them, about feeding them, etc. And if you can have a deep understanding in real time of how your fish are doing, issues about disease, about how much they're eating, when they're ready to be harvested, like those kinds of things transform the efficiency of an aquaculture plant. So that's true today. We're already doing that.
I'm actually going to quickly flip back to agriculture because I have a question from some of the audience, from Simone Boccola, who asks, one of the biggest issues we have found in agri-tech is adoption. About 20% really embrace emerging tech in the sector and are doing great development. The rest face barriers to implementing the innovations coming through. So is looking at barriers to adoption also part of the work that your project does, that Mineral does?
Absolutely. We can't solve every problem first, so a little reality check there that we're going to have to serialize it to some extent. But different people have different problems. The work that Mineral's doing right now is going to be more attractive, probably on day one, for breeders than anything else, because they're the ones who extract the most money per acre, and so this value that we're bringing is the most sort of in the money, the most sort of readily available. If you're not just growing, a strawberry or whatever, but you're trying to make your strawberries better, the data is worth more in those specific cases. So that's an example of kind of an early thing that we're already doing, going to people who develop plants instead of just farm the plants. And that's an easy place to go. If you go to slide number, I think it's 3. So these are some of the prototypes that they've been playing around with. On the left, you see us experimenting with getting rid of weeds by shooting paintballs at the weeds. It works, but it's probably not optimal. On the right, that's using lasers to kill off the weeds. That works great, but there's some fire hazards. Not sure that one's going to make it either. But that's another example of the teams building up a repertoire of what these plant buggies can do to help farmers. And each time we add new capabilities to what the plant buggies can do, it's just going to bring online another sort of set of farmers that before maybe didn't have the justification to say yes and now do.
A couple of other questions coming in from the audience, people asking about evidently the challenges that they think are very important. Katie Kearns wants to know if you're doing anything with regards to healthcare in America, with what are the problems that you think could be addressed with the kind of innovation that X does. And Kirsty Salmon is asking if you're doing anything to clean up microplastics in the oceans.
Uh, so on the answer to the first one is complicated. As I was mentioning before, we started Verily, which is now the life science business for Alphabet. And to be fair to Verily, they are somewhat now the X for Alphabet for healthcare. So we do sometimes do things in the life sciences, but we're fairly careful to check with them. And if they're doing it or they'd rather do it themselves, then we're going to leave them to do that. That doesn't mean we don't care about healthcare, but it means having started Verily, to some extent, we can help the world more by focusing on areas that we don't already have a Verily for within Alphabet. So it was sort of a qualified yes. On the second one, plastics is easily on our list. We have early explorations in that space. But to be fair, we have before. What we're a believer in is you can't know the future ahead of time. So you just have to get on the table in front of you a huge pile of crazy sounding ideas, because if they don't sound crazy, then they have no chance of changing. But of course, 99% of those are going to be wrong. And I don't believe that I can pick better than random, nor do I particularly believe that anyone else at X can pick better than random which of those crazy ideas are the right ones to bet on. So the way X functions is we say, okay, a moonshot, huge problem with the world, radical proposed solution, breakthrough technology. If it doesn't fit that basic criteria for a moonshot, then you throw it off the table right away. For whatever's left on the table, if it fits those criteria, let's call it a moonshot story hypothesis. It's probably crazy, but we don't know. Let's go test it. How cheaply can you satisfy yourself this isn't the 1 in 100 that's going to make it, so we can throw it away and go back to the next one on the table? And that process at X, that's sort of the underlying infrastructure of X. So plastics is absolutely one of those problems we want to fix, and we'll go back to it over and over again because it's a real problem with the world. But so far, we aren't positive we have the solution.
Right. So you don't sit in a room and say, "Bring me a solution for plastics." You wait for the solutions to come to you.
Yeah. In fact, we have this argument all the time at X because there are definitely super smart people at X who say, "Oh, Astro, you're missing the point. If we just committed to plastics and we had a bunch of plastics experts and we had the plastics labs and we just pre-agreed plastics is such an important problem." And I say, okay, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. You have a fixed amount of money, and I'm holding you to a standard of return on investment that is essentially impossible for you to hit. I know how to do it, but the way to do it is the process I just described to you. If you want to ignore the process I just described and pick plastics and have all the plastics people in the room, fine, okay. But I'm not lowering the bar for you. And eventually they figure out, actually, the way we were doing it before actually has a higher hit rate of really transformative things. In the first decade, I think we did some other good things for the world. We gave some good stuff to Alphabet, but Google Brain, Verily, Wing, and Waymo. That's not bad for a decade. Wing is the drones for package delivery. Also, right. A lot of complexity and regulatory overhead in that space. I think we can even do better in the second decade. But getting to those really world-changing things, I think if you just pre-pick a space, you're constraining your opportunities for creativity and for serendipity.
Well, so this, I think, gets at an interesting, to zoom out from X now, this gets at an interesting policy question, because what we've seen over the last few years, and particularly this year, is the need for solutions to specific problems, right? Climate change, pandemic preparedness, vaccine development, antibiotic resistance, some of the things I mentioned earlier, right? There are these areas where we clearly know that policy and technology are not actually delivering what we need at this moment. And we want to stimulate that. We want to incentivize that. So if setting priority areas like that is not the model at a place like X, what do you think do you think it is the model for governments? And how do you think that governments in general should be going around trying to incentivize the kind of innovation that we need to solve these big problems?
I'm not a government expert, obviously. But for what it's worth, I think governments can be most helpful on two basic fronts. R&D, I mean, real research, science. Science doesn't pay very well. Science has a poor return on investment for any particular company. So not a lot of science, real science, happens within companies. But the companies, including ours, are built on top of the science that has happened. So I think it is a civic issue, a government-oriented issue for basic science to be funded to provide the raw materials out of which moonshots can be built. So I certainly hope that governments continue to fund, and in fact, since they've been dropping off, at least in real dollar terms, serious funding for basic science, I would encourage government to ramp that funding back up again. There are also things that government could do to support innovation without picking winners and losers. Let me give you two really trivial examples. One is sandboxing. Just because it's scary to have drones fly everywhere in the United States doesn't mean that we couldn't have some areas where we let drones do more there than they do everywhere else. And then we can learn about that and then see how safe it is. And that will allow us to get to everywhere in the United States faster. That kind of sandboxing for the purpose of learning, the US government does some of, other countries do some of, but we could be doing a lot more of that. Another example is long-term thinking that Deep was talking about, and sort of very near and dear to my heart as well, is not how we're incented as investors. Long-term, in tax sense, is a year and a day. That's nuts. We should be giving people, we should charge them more if they sell their stock in a company after a year and a day, and then charge them even less, 10%, 12%, something like that, if they hold it for 10 years. Because you know what would happen? The hedge funds and day traders would lose money. Everyone who's investing for retirement would be fine because they're leaving their money somewhere for a decade mostly. And companies would go, wait a second, I now have my shareholders hanging out with me for 10 years in a day instead of 1 year in a day. I guess my new timeline is 10 years, not 1 year, for what I have to solve in order to make them happy. And then they would act longer term in the ways that Deep was talking about. So there are lots of things that government could do without pre-picking, I think, this is the solution and that one isn't.
I've got a question from Bhumika Latia, which sort of ties into a broader question that I wanted to ask. So she says, how do you celebrate failures as a team, and how do you motivate people to continue exploring ideas after repeated failures? And that ties into, I think, the question that I wanted to ask, which is the broader one. Basically, what have you learned over 10 years about motivating people and getting things done?
God, I wish I could just give you some of my marketing spiel. You happen to be catching me on an honest day. It's hard. That's what I've learned. It's really hard. We have a joke inside X that we're the worst moonshot factory in the world, except for all the other ones, which is sort of my way of trying to capture that we have a lot to be proud about, but we also have a lot of work still to do. And it's hard for a number of reasons. It's hard because, as you were just alluding to, this is very counterintuitive. We've mostly sort of beaten creativity and risk-taking out of each other by the time we're in our 30s. So getting people to unlearn all those bad behaviors is really hard. It's also complicated because X has a lot of churn. Because we're constantly stopping things, we lose some people for that reason. People sort of stay in X and do multiple things, so some of them don't go. But a lot of the really successful things, when a Waymo leaves, or a Loon leaves, or a Wing leaves, or a Verily leaves, each time one of those projects becomes an other bed, we lose all those awesome people. So we are constantly refreshing our population at this pretty high rate. And so those people have to start their unlearning journey at day one. And so keeping the sort of culture high and clear around what we're trying to do and why it's okay to do these pretty unusual things. They're not super technical. I'm not saying they're fancy. They're just unnatural, and that's just not how people behave. So I can say to you, hey, Gideon, welcome to X. It's your first day. Let me be clear to you. Our job is to do things that are outsized in their goodness for the world and their goodness for Alphabet. And I think those things are super aligned by it. Here's the secret, one of like the basic secrets of life and innovation. There's a whole bunch of stuff that has a 1 in 10 chance of working out, but 100 times the return of normal if you do it. You can do the math. That's a 10x expected return on your time. So then you're like, well, sounds good, Astro. I'm on it. Da-da-da. And you go back to your desk and you'll immediately think, wait a second. That means I have a 90% chance of getting a 0. Am I going to get promoted if I work on that? And like, am I going to get a bonus if I get a 0? And immediately the gravitational pull of normalcy sort of kicks in. And even at X, you're thinking, yeah, maybe I'll just be normal today. It sounds safer. And so then we have to put processes in place that say, no, seriously, we're not grading you on whether you get the 1 in 100. We're grading you on the quality of the experiment you ran. We want to know how good the expected utility of your bet was, not what the output of your bet is. And the more we push to that, the more comfortable you can get that you'll actually be rewarded for taking smart risks if you take smart risks. So it's an uphill battle. I'm not pretending it's not, but it is. We have to do hundreds of things like the example I just gave you in how we performance manage people and how we promote people and how we pay people that all send signals back into each other that we value, flying pigs metaphorically and literally, that we value the weirdness, creativity, and the outsized risks when the rewards justify it.
A lot of people on the chat have been asking about that flag in your background. So you just answered the question, the flying pigs.
Go ahead.
One thing that you said just now, that's something that is a great thing for the world, which would also be great for Alphabet. Do you think it's maybe a little self-serving to say that those two things are necessarily aligned?
I hope not. I mean, I deeply believe that it's true. Look, is it possible to make a business that is shitty for the world, but good for you? Sure. Like you can make a robot that goes around and grabs people's wallets and runs. You make a lot of money that way, but that's pretty clearly not good for the world. So we have an existence proof. So I'm not saying all profitable businesses are good for the world. But if you go back to what I said a moonshot was, I didn't say the word money. I said huge problem with the world, radical proposed solution, breakthrough technology. There's no dollar sign in there.
But it was part of the goal, wasn't it, to create a company that could potentially be the next Google, could solve the innovator's dilemma for you.
You're on your first day at work at X. I'm telling you, that's our criteria. We're just not interested unless it hits those 3 things and money does not appear. Here's the issue. If your plan for how to solve a big problem with the world loses money, I have news for you. It will not solve that big problem in the world. Things that make money get bigger and things that lose money get smaller. So let's find something at that Venn diagram intersection of great for the world and makes a lot of money. Because that's the thing, that subset of things are the things that will really change the world. And I think that there are innumerable examples of things like the Haber-Bosch process that turned out to be really good for the world and to make a lot of money.
Right.
So let's just pick from those. I don't think there's any shortages of them.
Out of the projects that have have come out of X and have graduated, I don't think any of them has yet made money. Right. At what point do you feel like that starts to be a problem?
Google Brain, maybe as a asterisk on that. It's not its own independent part of Alphabet, so its finances are not teased apart. But look, I think I'm buying options on the future for Alphabet. Essentially, if you're Sundar and Ruth, you give us money, and then you wait a long period of time. We're going to try a lot of things. Most of them will not work out. So there's going to be a lot of what looks like waste. but not because we purposefully are making waste. It's just that's the natural result. A lot of experiments, the answer is no. And then very occasionally, you will get a Wing or a Waymo or a Verily or a Google Brain, and you just have to decide if the value of those things, and the value today of those things is essentially the discounted cash flow of what they would make in the future if they were successful and made a lot of money, multiplied by the chances that they actually get to that state. So that's your call if you're funding me. But I think you could probably look at the stuff that we've done and say, yeah, it was probably worth it many times over relative to the amount of money we've given you.
Right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Astro, thank you so much for taking the time with us. It's been really fascinating. It's great to have you here.
My pleasure. Keep innovating, everyone.